Rewrite time.
You're late. I'm not paying for those.
I didn't want to make this video. I'm serious, I really didn't. I've been critical of the MCU Spider-Man many times in the past, but I was really hoping that this movie would exceed my expectations. I didn't go in wanting to hate it, I went in hoping that it would be great. But unfortunately, it just didn't hit that mark for me. I know there are a lot of people who absolutely adore this movie, and that's completely fine. That's great. We're all entitled to our own opinions and we're allowed to discuss them given that it's done in a civilized manner. But to me, the movie lacked in too many areas for me to say that I liked it. I know for a fact that you probably won't agree with me 100% on anything that I say, and that's okay. I'm going to do my best to explain a lot of the things that I think should have been changed, but I understand that you may disagree and there's nothing wrong with that. That's what the comment section's for. Blow me up, do it, I dare you, I want you to do it, come on. I've seen how everybody is with High Top Films and Evan Filarka, so come on, don't hold back. Before we jump into the rewrite, I do kind of want to get my quick thoughts out there about how I felt about the movie. I have a spoiler-free reaction and a spoiler discussion up on my channel. I'm just going to give you kind of a quick rundown on the things that I liked about the movie as well as some more general things that I disliked, with the more specific problems coming up as we go through the rewrite. All in all, the movie was about a 5 out of 10, maybe a 6 out of 10 for me. It fixed a lot of aspects about Homecoming that I had issues with, while also doubling down on what I didn't care for in that movie. I liked how there was more emotional weight to Peter's story and his motivation wasn't just, I want to be an Avenger to please my new daddy Tony. I also liked how Peter comes more to his own by the end, and he doesn't feel so much like a goofy kid anymore, instead he's more like his own hero. I also liked Mysterio. That illusion scene is incredible, and it's one of the best scenes in any Spider-Man movie, period. And all the performances were really great, especially Tom Holland. He did a killer job in this movie. However, the film overall was still lacking in consequences for Peter, and I'm talking about the little things here, not the mid-credit scene or the stuff with Mysterio, but the smaller consequences to Peter's social life for being Spider-Man, since those are just as important to a Spider-Man story as the big ones. I think that while Peter does come into his own, the message that they try to convey about the next Iron Man is muddled and executed poorly. They continue to CGI over the gorgeous practical suit that Tom Holland has, and all of the action scenes are just done and posted on a computer. Some jokes are good, while a lot of others fall really flat. The depiction of high school in general is honestly kind of patronizing, more on that later. In general, the movie's kind of a mess and isn't really sure what it wants to be. Alright, now I guess it's the time we should start talking about, the rewrite, since I guess that's all I'm good for, right? So, here are the more general changes I would want to make throughout the entire movie, but before anything else, I do want to clear something up. I understand that the Sony Marvel deal limits this movie series in a way with the characters it can use and how accurate they are. However, I think it's important to view a movie on its own merits first before taking any legal or political things into account. It is possible for the movie to still use their versions of each character and still make a great Spider-Man movie, and if that had happened, I probably wouldn't be doing this rewrite. However, I don't think they did that, so I'm going to rewrite this movie as if it were a perfect world where there's no conflicts of interest like that, and I can just do whatever I want because it's my YouTube video. Come down. I get a lot of comments trying to explain to me the inner workings of the deal as an excuse for these movies, and I don't think it's valid personally. So coming hot off that topic, the first general change that I would want to make is that I think Michelle Jones, MJ, should just be named Mary Jane Watson. I already said this in my Homecoming rewrite, but if you're gonna do Mary Jane, just call her Mary Jane. Don't be this weird in-between things with Michelle as MJ, but still not technically Mary Jane. I like Zendaya as the character, and I think there's a lot of potential for her. I like her and Tom's chemistry. I even like her personality. I know a lot of people don't, but I like it. It's enjoyable, it's different, and there's a lot of potential for her to grow into the Mary Jane Watson that we know from the comics. But I think when you incorporate this character and give her a different name, it just tells me that this character isn't the same MJ for Peter. And somewhere out there in the world, there's Mary Jane Watson waiting to show up, and so then I shouldn't take this one seriously, and I don't think that's very fair. I personally have some headcanon about Michelle actually being Mary Jane Watson, only she was put into like witness protection and her name was changed for her safety. It doesn't really fit within this rewrite, but I just wanted to get that idea out there. Secondly, I think that Aunt May shouldn't know that Peter's Spider-Man, much less be accepting of it. Her knowing his identity adds nothing of value to the movie and only serves as a get-out-of-jail-free card for Peter to get an excuse to ditch class, which he shouldn't get. They could have really explored some dramatic themes about the character and what it's like to worry about Peter all day, especially right after her husband was killed. But instead, they just used her for jokes and to support Peter. If they had decided to have May not be affected by the snap, there could have been a really incredible dramatic scene where she sees him for the first time in years and we get that moment of love and compassion between the two characters, but instead there's no conflict conflict and no drama whatsoever with her. I don't want to compare this to the comics too much, but when Aunt May first found out in the JMS run, the greatest run of Spider-Man comics ever made, don't at me, she was betrayed and hurt that Peter would lie to her and almost get killed every night, to the point where she wouldn't speak to him for weeks until she finally came to an understanding about it. She didn't support him doing it, but she understood that is what Ben would have wanted. But again, that wasn't until much later in Peter's life, where he'd already moved out and was no longer having to sneak out every night. So it was done as a way to add that conflict between May and Peter and to keep her involved in the story. So long story short, they should have done something interesting with May knowing Peter's identity, but to completely avoid the trouble, they should have saved Aunt May finding out Peter's identity until the end of the third movie or the fourth movie to really use all the story potential from that dynamic. For this movie, her character not knowing leads to more conflict and drama because she's worried about his safety after all the attacks, and she yells at him for constantly ditching on the field trip. On that note, he should be yelled at by everybody about that way more than he does. Just doing that is really bad and can get you suspended.
Or worse, expelled.
So the next general change I would want to make is to treat this school and these characters like an actual high school, not this patronizing view of what some 30-year-old thinks it is. I was in high school not too long ago. I'm 21. And so unless if we had a big shift in attitude in the past 3 years, this is not what high school's like. This movie treats these 15, 16-year-olds like they're 12 and they're in the 7th grade. They form relationships based on nothing that only lasts a few weeks, and everything that the students do is never treated with any sense of weight. Yeah, it's funny and it's breezy, but the movie makes the school environment so soft and less harsh than it really is, just for the sake of some jokes. Yeah, we all know that not all your problems in high school will actually matter. I think it's fair to say that you'll forget like 80% of those things by the time you graduate. But the thing is, these kinds of problems matter a lot when you are in high school. When you're a high schooler, you are a hormonal teenager with only one group of friends, being forced to follow a rigid, unforgiving system that's proven to not work, on top of social pressures and other stress. Of course it feels like the weight of the world is on your shoulders all the time. High school sucks. High school is the worst. But the problem is, this movie presents its characters and their issues like they already know that they don't matter. Nobody feels any weight on their shoulders. Everything gets brushed off with no consequence and no emotional stakes whatsoever. The movie tries so hard to be a comedy that it forgets the most important part about being in high school. Alright, that's all I gotta say about that. Let's just get started. We start the movie similar to how we got it, except instead of Fury and Hill investigating the village, it's just a pair of nameless SHIELD agents. They talk about how witnesses say that the cyclone had a face and the elemental appears, roars at the camera, and the camera cuts into the intro. We'll get back to this, just trust me. Now, for the in memoriam montage, I know a lot of people were really bothered by this, since it takes the events of Endgame and the deaths of these characters and just chooses to make it into a joke. I wasn't personally bothered by that aspect, since I didn't have a ton of personal connection to the events of Endgame, and it's nice to kind of get a break from that super serious story, but I can also agree with what other people are saying. My biggest issue with it is that, what I was talking about before, this movie treats high schoolers like 12-year-olds. The kids at this high school, which is supposedly a high-tech, super smart kids school, make horrible videos for the school newscasts. I know some high schoolers now who make better content than I do, and you're telling me that these kids use watermarked Getty images and Comic Sans with misspelled words? Come on. Yeah, school productions are always pretty cringy, but it's the awkwardness of being a high schooler that makes it that way, not incompetence. So, on to the first major change. Brad Davis. Gone. Doesn't exist. He's out of here. Oh, where'd he go? He's gone. He's not here. His character was this weird replacement for Flash Thompson's role as the rival to Peter, and I think it turned the real Flash Thompson into a joke character who gets pushed aside. They say they want to tackle the overly complex topic that is modern bullying, but instead they just have Peter brush Flash's insults aside in a way that doesn't bother him. I think that having Flash take Brad's role as the rival to MJ in this love triangle would make the whole plot a little bit more compact, and also show why Flash is more than just a thorn in Peter's side. Since at the end of the day, Flash Thompson is supposed to be the bane of Peter's existence and make his life hell. Because to me, the interesting dynamic between Flash and Peter in high school is how, no matter how powerful and strong and hurtful Flash is to Peter, Peter can't fight back or else risk hurting Flash and exposing his identity. He has to be responsible with his power, and Flash Thompson is a constant test for that. Moving along to the next change, instead of starting with Peter telling Ned his plan to win over MJ, he just tells Ned that he thinks he might have a crush on MJ. It may not sound like much, but having Peter start the movie being basically obsessed with MJ comes out of nowhere and isn't hinted at all in the previous movie. It's implied that she likes him, and that's fine, but his feelings for her kind of come out of thin air. I think that starting the audience at an early stage in Peter's crush lets us understand that character change a little bit better, while also exploring that side of relationships, which is pretty realistic for high school. Maybe Ned is surprised and asks him why, and Peter just says something about, I don't know, man. Something about her just feels right. I can't really explain it. I'm happy when I'm around her. That's all I can say. And so instead of Peter following a plan, he's just trying to spend some time with her. He doesn't have some great scheme to buy her a necklace and confess his feelings for her or something. He just wants to sit with her and talk with her because she makes him happy. Now, since for this rewrite, we're going with a story where Aunt May does not know that Peter is Spider-Man, we don't go straight to the ceremony at the shelter. We instead cut to a scene of Peter fighting some low-level crime. A big part of what I liked about Homecoming was that friendly neighborhood Spider-Man stuff, and that wasn't really anywhere in this movie. It can be the scene from the bank or whatever from the trailers with the Manfredi mob, which they decided to put on the Blu-ray for some reason, or it can be a mugging or something. Just something simple to remind the viewer that Peter is in his element in New York and fighting basic thugs. It can be in this scene where we establish that his spider sense hasn't been working properly because of the strain on him to become the next Iron Man, similar to how it was in Spider-Man 2, but on a lesser scale. He gets an alert on his phone, and he realizes that he's late to Aunt May's ceremony. He quickly webs the guys to a wall before swinging off. He sneaks into the shelter where he just catches the end of May's speech. He talks to May backstage, and Happy shows up because he works with May. We learn that Peter asks him to watch over May and let Peter know if something happens to her. So Happy started helping May out with the shelter to keep an eye on her. Peter takes a second, he pauses, and he's like, "This will be about the time that Mr. Stark would say something sexual about my aunt," which Happy responds, "That sounds inappropriate, I'm not going to do that." Happy then informs Peter that Nick Fury is trying to get into contact with him, to which Peter says he doesn't want any part in any big level SHIELD or Avengers things for a while, since he just wants to focus more on the little guys. Not just because he just needs a break from the big Infinity War level stuff, but also because it's easier on him, and his self-doubt is preventing him from doing larger level threats, so he decides to ghost Nick Fury. So Peter begins to pack for his trip, and he stops to take a look at his Spidey suit, hanging in the closet. He doesn't pack it, wanting to go on just a normal vacation with his friends and not have to worry about all his responsibilities. He gets ready to leave when he sees the initials on his suitcase, BFP. Now, it's time we play a little game. Since the MCU refuses to tell us what those initials mean, I'm going to throw out some options and I want you, viewers at home, to guess the correct answer. Is it A, big friendly physicist, B, bisexual flying playboy, or C, Benjamin fucking Parker? If you guess C, congrats, you've seen or read a single Spider-Man story before. But if you guess A or B, also congrats because you did your best based on the zero information given to you in the MCU. Peter takes a look at his suitcase and he stops. And there isn't a single word spoken in the scene. But the look on Peter's face says it all. Peter wants to take a break, he really does. But he knows he can't. Peter sighs, and he grabs his web shooters, muttering, "Just in case." He throws them in his bag and he heads out the door. The rest of the first act continues mostly similar to how he got it, only with the changes to Flash taking Brad's role in the story, as well as Peter having a more early onset crush on MJ. So then the water elemental attacks. I'm not calling him Hydro Man because that's offensive. Peter tries to help out, but he's unable to do anything effective, so he decides to focus his efforts on saving people and getting them safe. And then, out of nowhere, award-winning actor Jake Gyllenhaal shows up to save the day. Hold up, that's not right. Oh fuck, that's Mysterio! Oh wait, what? Oh, he's a good guy. Oh, that's weird. But okay. That night, Nick Fury shows up in Peter's room and basically kidnaps him. He takes him to the meeting with Hill and Mysterio. Now remember, Peter doesn't have a suit, but he still wants to protect his secret identity, so he needs to cover his face with something. So Peter Parker walks into this high-security government facility with a paper bag over his head. Throughout the movie, Peter talks about how his identity is important to him, but he happily reveals it at any chance he gets. In the scene, Fury can rip the bag off his face, since we gotta see Tom Holland's face for the boys and girls to swoon over out there. But that extra bit of resistance reinforces the importance of the secret identity to Peter. Peter refuses to help Fury and Mysterio, giving his excuse about the school trip, but in reality, he still just doesn't think he's ready for any big-level threats like this. He returns to his hotel only to learn the next day that Nick Fury has hijacked his summer vacation and is sending Peter to Prague anyway. So, Peter arrives in Prague, and I think it's time we talk about that weird subplot with the picture of him in his underwear in the drone strike. The scene was just kind of strange with that random agent who didn't really have a character besides European woman, and I think that the whole subplot could use a rework. So here's my suggestion. Peter's given that stealth suit, which I think's hideous, just throwing that out there. I think they should redesign that, it's gross. And he puts it on. Then Flash walks in and sees Peter in the suit. Peter says something and Flash says, "Hold on, I recognize that voice. You're motherfucking Spider-Man!" And Flash freaks out, he geeks out about meeting his hero. And how even with this new suit, he can tell it's him because he's that big of a fan. And Flash takes a selfie and says that he's going to tell everybody how he met Spider-Man on a school trip. At this point, Peter starts to freak out a little bit. Flash might not be smart enough to put two and two together about Peter being Spider-Man, but MJ and everybody else certainly will be. So now, instead of Peter wanting to delete the picture to help his relationship with MJ, it's to keep his identity a secret. And now we get to introducing Edith. Edith was weird. Firstly, I don't care for the fact that Tony Stark made a big fleet of drones which could precisely assassinate anybody who's considered a threat, quote unquote, which was pretty much the exact same thing that Hydra was trying to do in Winter Soldier. Secondly, it's just stupid of him to entrust such an incredibly powerful military strike force to a 15-year-old. Edith being this big murder program just strikes a bad chord with me. And I think the story would be improved if Edith were instead an incredibly advanced AI hive mind system. Maybe it's the system that kept all of Tony's suits autonomous during the end of Iron Man 3. It makes a little more sense for Tony to make something like that, as well as entrust it with a 15-year-old, because it's not a fucking murder strike force. So now that Edith has been changed, we can have a completely different scene on the bus. The conflict of the scene is instead going to be Peter using Edith to try and delete the photo, but he needs Flash's phone since the photo's been backed up to the cloud already or something like that. So Peter has to try and find a way to get Flash distracted to get the phone without him noticing and all that stuff. It was weird to have a scene where Peter almost kills one of his classmates, especially when done with such levity. So with these changes, the scene can still have kind of that fun breeziness to it without feeling like a mostly innocent child's life is put in danger. So moving on. So we keep going and we get that scene where Mysterio and Peter talk on that rooftop and they have a bit of a heart-to-heart. Basically the exact same with one important addition. Mysterio brings up Stark and he asks why he meant so much to Peter. Peter takes a deep breath, and we learn that Peter lost a father figure before. He was responsible for his loss, and it left him with this gaping hole in his life. But then one day, Tony Stark comes into his life, and suddenly that hole is filled. Not all the way. Nobody could ever replace the people that he's lost. But Peter grew attached to that feeling of mentorship and fatherhood that Tony brought. And then when Tony died, Peter blamed himself, feeling responsible yet again for the death of his father figure. Mysterio gives Peter some reassurance, allowing Peter and the audience to connect with him more. The opera scene is identical to what we got. That was honestly my favorite part of the movie. MJ asks Peter if he wants to sit with her, but he has to leave to help with the elemental, giving Flash the opportunity to sit with MJ. This obviously upsets MJ a lot, and she just decides to take a walk to get some air and calm down. So we get to the fight at that carnival festival thing, and it's similar to what we got, not super original, having Ned and Betty stuck in a Ferris wheel and needing saving, but it's alright. The big change with this, however, is that during the fight, Ned and Betty call for Peter to help him, but he puts his focus on the elemental. MJ stumbles upon the fight and watches from afar. Peter unknowingly breaks off a piece of tech, and it flies toward MJ. She looks at it confused before taking it. The scene continues how we got it, with Mysterio willing to sacrifice his life to defeat the elemental. After the fight, Peter and Beck sit at the bar and celebrate. They talk about Edith and the glasses, and Peter decides to give them away. Not because of some weird logic of Tony gave them to me so that I could give them away, but instead a further emphasis on the fact that Peter doesn't feel worthy. He doesn't feel responsible enough. Peter feels like he's failed Tony's legacy too much to be able to handle such a responsibility, and he's seen Beck in action, and he truly believes that he's going to be Tony's successor. So he entrusts him with the Edith glasses and the power that comes with them. After Peter walks out, the walls of the bar become distorted, and the camera pulls into Beck's face. We cut back to the first scene in the movie, with the Earth Elemental and the SHIELD agents.
It's rewind time.
The elemental screams in the face of the agents, and we hear cut, and we see that the opening scene was nothing more than a movie being filmed. The monster vanishes, revealing a Stark Industries jet from behind it. The jet lands, disrupting the entire production, and Happy Hogan steps out, saying it's important Stark Industries business. He calls out, asking for the special effects lead, and Quentin Beck steps out to greet him. Happy says that Tony Stark learned about his hologram tech, and he's been offered a job at Stark Industries to develop it further. Beck, you have the ability to change the world with your creation. Elated, Beck agrees to the job offer. We cut back to Beck in the bar as more and more of it fades away, and then to a shot of Beck working at Stark Industries on his tech. Back to Beck as the camera pulls closer. We then get the scene from Civil War where Tony brushes the tech aside and names it Barf. Back to Beck, where we hear this voiceover, "You're fired," echoing over and over as his face forms into an enraged scowl. He then jumps up and the entire room thunders with applause. I think this one addition to Beck's origin would do wonders in making fans of the character enjoy this interpretation more. My favorite aspect of Mysterio was his connection to the film industries and the effect work. NerdSync has an incredible video about how the character helped shape his life and turn him into the person that he is today because of that very connection to the film industry. I think that the way the movie did it, just making Quentin Beck a former employee of Tony who builds tech, is a bit of a disservice to what makes the character so great. It was fine with Homecoming changing up Vulture's backstory, since I think the Vulture has a pretty inconsequential backstory, and in my Homecoming rewrite I wanted a connection between Vulture and Falcon, but the connection of Mysterio to the greater MCU is done at the cost of what makes him so interesting to a lot of comic fans. I also think it'd be nice if Beck came up with a story for Mysterio and the Elementals as well, since Mysterio is known to be really theatrical, and that would have been a nice taste of that. So Peter gets back to the hotel, and Ned is pissed that Peter would just leave him and Betty on the Ferris wheel and not help them. If Ned is gonna know Peter's identity as Spider-Man, we need to have some conflict as a result of that. Peter tries to apologize, but Ned just doesn't want to hear it. On top of that, MJ is also pissed at Peter for ditching her at the opera. This would be the perfect amount of social consequences that are so important to the Spider-Man story. At first, MJ refuses to go hang out with him, but Peter basically begs her. They talk, and she slowly gets over how he ditched her, and she starts to have a really nice time with him. She brings up that she thinks Spider-Man might be in Prague, and shows him the piece of tech that he found. She does not find out that he's Spider-Man. She might have a hint, but she doesn't find out for sure in this movie. Now, it only doesn't just add more support for Peter and make Ned feel redundant, but I also think it'd be nice to see the relationship develop a little bit more before getting to that point. I also find it interesting how we've never had an on-screen Spider-Man where he's in a relationship and his partner doesn't know his secret. That was a big part of classic Spider-Man stories, how Peter had to keep his secrets from his many girlfriends, and MJ didn't find out well into their relationship. So I think it'd be interesting to explore that concept in a film series. Peter and MJ keep talking, and they almost kiss, but Peter bumps into the projector, making it go off. Peter puts the pieces of the puzzle together and realizes that Mysterio isn't who he said he was, and that he made a huge mistake.
I made a huge, tiny mistake.
Before running off and leaving MJ again. And now here's the other big change. I don't think she and Peter should get together in this movie. She should have feelings for him, but she is so infuriated by his disappearing act that she can't be in a relationship with someone like that. Say it with me, folks. Consequences for his actions. The movie keeps going the way we got it, and Peter gets picked up by Fury, taken to a secure location, only to learn that it's Mysterio in disguise. And we get that incredible illusion sequence. That scene alone is absolutely fantastic. Probably one of the best scenes we've ever gotten in a Spider-Man movie ever. You'd think that a scene that's as good as that would have nothing that I would want to change in it, right? Right? You clearly don't know shit about me. I think it would be nice if, during this sequence, Mysterio taunted Peter about the failings of Tony. Like how Tony manipulated him to go into Berlin, how he ruined the lives of so many people and caused so much death and pain with no repercussions. Peter needs to see where Tony failed so that he doesn't make the same mistakes, as well as so Peter can learn that being the next Iron Man is the wrong thing for him. And now the big one. This is the one that everybody's talking about. The grave. A massive, massive headstone stands over Peter, casting a shadow of pain and doubt onto him. And what does the grave say? Ben Parker. We've already been hammered over the head with Tony Stark and that relationship with Peter, so we don't need any more of that here. And addressing something deeper than that for Peter would be really powerful and go a long way into making him his own hero. It can also be the first time we ever see his name. Of course I want references to Ben earlier, like the ones I mentioned before, but it'd be really powerful to keep him unnamed until this very moment when Peter is at his lowest. Mysterio tricks Peter into telling him that Ned and MJ know his secret, and he gets hit by the train. Now we get to the third act. Not a whole ton is different about this, except for some few key moments that I think are really, really important. The first has to do with Mysterio and his team. Now, I like the idea of Mysterio starting out as a team effort, just like how no single person is responsible for making a movie great. Quentin Beck wasn't alone in making Mysterio great. However, it feels strange to see him working with a team later down the line, so I think it would be cool if, over time, Beck begins to lose faith in his team. We got hints of that, but I think it'd be really nice if they went the step further and if he ends up killing or abandoning his team altogether by the final fight. So Peter ends up in the Netherlands and is picked up by Happy. This scene goes really similar to how we got it, where they come up with a plan and Peter decides to trust his spider sense. I think it'd also be nice if Happy's the person to name it Spider Sense. I think that'd be kind of cool. So Peter begins to build his new upgraded suit, and Happy puts on some AC/DC, like he would with Tony, but Peter tells him to turn it off, and he changes it to Blitzkrieg Bop by the Ramones. The movie's choice to play AC/DC in the scene just muddled the message that Peter should be his own man, and I think the song choice coming from Homecoming would be a perfect alternative to that. It would also be cool if the fight with the drones was set to the song for a little bit. And now, speaking of the final fight, I enjoyed it, but I think the Mysterio drones should be a little bit more visually interesting. They looked like something out of like early Marvel, with just a pretty bland design that made the fight not very visually interesting. Give me some color with their designs, maybe make them look like bats or demons or something with character, because as it stands, it just looked pretty unappealing with just a lot of gray. Peter shows up and faces off with Mysterio, and I think that Mysterio should wear his costume during the final fight. I liked the idea of the mocap suit, but if we're gonna get Spider-Man versus Mysterio for the first time ever on film, then give me Spider-Man versus Mysterio, not Spider-Man versus Jake Gyllenhaal. Maybe when Peter shows up, the suit gets projected onto Beck, maybe like an intimidation thing. Now everything around Peter goes black, and he takes a deep breath, closes his eyes, and the classic white lines form around his head. He dodges the attacks of the drones, bounces off the wall, and takes down Mysterio, shattering that stupid fishbowl to pieces, all without saying a word.
Whoa, that was sick, dude. You rock so hard, Spidey.
Now you'll notice, I didn't say anything about the Peter Tingle joke. That's cause it's dumb. It was sort of funny the first time, I saw it on a TV spot and I laughed, but by the end it was just forced down our throats so much that it just became kind of annoying. I think that having Peter say that at this moment ruins what could have been an incredibly powerful scene just for the sake of a dumb joke. And that was the single thing that infuriated me more than anything else in the entire movie. If they had treated the scene with any sense of weight or stakes and allowed the audience a moment for Peter to feel like a hero, then the scene would have been incredible. Peter avoids one final surprise attack from Beck before knocking him to the ground. He calls off the drone strike, and Fury talks to him through his earpiece, congratulating him and telling him that Edith will be put in the right hands. Peter takes a second before calling for a complete self-destruction of the Edith system. Fury's pissed at him, ordering him to stop, but Peter says that this amount of power is too much for anyone to have, and nobody should be burdened with that responsibility. Also, note here, Mysterio doesn't get killed. I know he's probably not dead in the real movie, but until they confirm that he's alive, he's canonically dead to me. And I just can't really get behind that. We've spent years of Marvel having really bland villains, with even the good ones being killed off early. That was one thing I really liked about Homecoming, how the Vulture wasn't killed and instead was just sent to prison. The MCU needs to build up its catalog of good villains so that they could do like a Dark Avengers of some kind. So killing them off in their first movie needs to stop. We wrap up the movie with Ned and Peter making up and becoming friends again, and MJ dating neither Flash or Peter. They head home and we cut to Peter standing on top of a building in his new suit. He gets a text from May saying, "You on your way yet?" He leaps off the building and we get that swing sequence. Peter lands on top of a building and he takes off his mask, before we cut to him inside of a bustling newsroom surrounded by people. He walks into an office and says, "My name's Peter Parker. I'm here for the photographer position." And J. Jonah Jameson spins around in his chair, takes one look at Peter, and...
You serious?
Alright, I'm not forgetting this mid-credit scene, because that's important. I got a lot to say about this mid-credit scene that we got. First of all, I love the idea of the city turning on Spider-Man, making him more controversial than he is. However, I don't think this was the way to go about it. I think that the accusations on Peter are way too extreme. The dynamic between Spider-Man and New York is at its best when Spidey's controversial, where any citizen could be for or against him. However, this is pretty cut and dry. Spider-Man is accused of attempted genocide for the most part, and there's video evidence. You can always like shield it away or something, but it just feels like too much, you know? If you're gonna accuse Spider-Man of a crime, it should be like a single murder or something with like shady evidence or something like that. That allows you to have everybody be on a different side in a way that makes sense. But my biggest problem with this credit scene is the very final decision. I don't believe that this version of the character is ready for the world to know his identity yet. We barely got any stories where he makes an effort to keep it a secret, so it feels like they're rushing to get to this point. I am also of the belief that it won't actually have many lasting consequences for Peter, because they can go about it in two ways. The first is that it sticks and now everybody knows Peter's identity. I'm not a fan of this because that era of Spider-Man was pretty unenjoyable, and I also believe that it will end up making things easier for him, since now he doesn't have to lie to anybody. They could make it a serious thing, but I doubt it, because realistically it'll be handled the exact same way as Aunt May. We won't see those first few weeks of Peter's life being hell, but instead we'll skip over it and the next movie will start with it all being mostly dealt with. The second option is that it ends up being fixed through some big magic comic book logic or something, which would also feel pretty unearned and cheap. And I just think they're rushing through these stories and not taking the time that they really need to. It's like they're flipping through a trade paperback or skimming a Wikipedia article. So because of that, here's my proposal for an alternate mid-credit scene. Quentin Beck goes to jail since he wasn't killed, and he's put in the same cell with Mac Gargan. Gargan says to Beck, "I heard Spider-Man put you in here." Beck responds, "You know Spider-Man? If I knew who he was, you have no idea the things I'd do to that guy." Mysterio smirks and he says, "Well, I've got some good news for you," before his face glitches slightly. I find it strange how the Homecoming credit scene featured Scorpion heavily, only for this movie to not mention him at all. I think if the first three of these movies are meant to build up the Sinister Six as was initially hinted at in the Homecoming credit scene, that would be really interesting and a good parallel to the first phase of the MCU with the build up of the Avengers. Now, on to the post-credit scene. I don't really care for the one we got. I'm sure it'll be cool with their quote-unquote adaptation of Secret Invasion, but we really need a scene like the Thanos scene in the first Avengers to direct us to a concrete goal and idea for the future of the MCU. And I think I have the perfect idea for that, which also fits within what we were given. Nick Fury and Agent Hill are at their base, and Hill sees something on the scanner. It matches the same readings as the elementals.
"I've lost the bleeps, I've lost the sweeps, and I've lost the creeps."
Fury says to double check that it's not another one of Beck's tricks, but Hill says she's already triple checked. This is real. And they can just barely scan a group of life forms trying to break through. 4 of them. Fury transforms into a Skrull and says, "Well, that complicates things." The addition of the Fantastic Four is honestly the only thing that I'm looking forward to in the MCU at this point. More than X-Men, more than Guardians 3, but the original Marvel family finally in the MCU. I think Secret Invasion should be the next pit stop for these movies, but the introduction to the Fantastic Four should be the next goal. All in all, I'm just tired. That's really it. This movie kind of exhausted me. It wasn't horrible by any means. It just felt like everything about it was made with the sole purpose of being made, lacking a lot of that energy and heart that Homecoming did. I've said pretty much all I need to say about the specifics of this movie, so I'll just end with this. Spider-Man stories rely on conflict. All stories do, but Spider-Man ones especially. To tell a Spider-Man story without drama and social troubles for Peter to deal with is like telling a Batman story where he doesn't care about his parents' deaths. Yeah, it's been beaten to death already. Yeah, you can potentially tell stories without it, but there's a reason that the only Batman movie with no reference to Thomas and Martha Wayne is Batman and Robin. And I quite enjoy Batman and Robin, but I would never call it a great interpretation of this character, just like I wouldn't with this movie. I see a lot of people say that because Spider-Man's still a kid, he shouldn't need to face too much struggle just yet, and then if we wait a few more movies, then things will be the way that we want them to be. I wholeheartedly disagree with that sentiment. The character shouldn't be shielded from the pain that is life just because he's a child. In fact, he should face it more because of that. Spider-Man is about being forced to be mature for your age based on the hardship that life throws your way, and managing those hardships in order to help others and do what needs to be done. It's not about taking the easy way out, but sticking through your pain and your struggles because you need to in order to do the right thing. That's the meaning of responsibility. Not just for Peter Parker, not just for Spider-Man, but for everything. It is everyone's responsibility to do the right thing, no matter the cost. And Spider-Man should be setting that example. But with this movie, that was far from the truth. Hey everybody, thanks for watching. If you're new here and you like my stuff, be sure to hit that subscribe button, it really helps me out. And if you like this video, hit the like button. If you didn't like this video, hit that dislike button, go for it. I don't really care. Leave a comment down in the comments if you hated my stuff or if you love my stuff, or if there's anything else you think you want to change or add or, remove or whatever from Spider-Man Far From Home. With that, this has been TroyBoy17 coming at you live, and I will see you later.